Hey everyone, what is going on? Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to test Flask REST API using unittest standard library module. So why is API testing important? To ensure that the APIs work as expected. Second, to specify and ensure that the application can handle the desired load. Third, to make sure API provides the required functionality. And fourth, to establish that APIs work seamlessly. In this video, we will start with writing a simple unit test for an addition function and then use the same concept and build upon it to write tests for Flask API. The Flask API that will be tested was already coded in my earlier video. Click on the top right button to go to that video. For this particular video, I assume that you already have an intermediate level experience in Python 3 and Flask. So let's go to our Flask REST API directory. In this first task, we'll write a function called add2numbers and we will write a unit test for that particular function. Let's call it API_test.py. So we'll import unit test. Unit test is part of the standard library for Python 3. The framework implemented by unit test support fixtures, test suites, and a test runner. So we'll create a function add2numbers. The function will return a plus b. So a test case is created by subclassing unittest.testCase. In this, we will create a class addTest and we'll subclass testCase. In this class, we'll add two class methods which will test two different scenarios for add2numbers. The methods should start with the letters test. This naming convention informs the test runner about which methods represent test. Test 1 c is equal to add2numbers 5, 10. The result will be 15. So we will use assert. We'll use assert equal to check for an expected result. Assert true or assert false to verify a condition. Assert races to verify that a specific exception gets raised. These methods are used instead of the assert statement so that the test runner can accumulate all test results and produce a report. So in this particular case, we will be using assert equal. And in the second test, we will do a negative use case where we'll do c is equal to add2numbers 5, 10. We'll do assert not equal c, 10. So to run these tests, we can use command line, but I will be using a VS Code extension called Test Explorer. Go to the extension tab, search for Python Test Explorer and enable it. Once you enable it, there will be a new icon on the left hand side, a Flask icon, which will be a Test Explorer. The Test Explorer automatically figures out tests in that particular directory. But in case it doesn't, do Shift Command and P, type discover tests. Click enter and it will automatically discover tests. So as you notice, it discovered both our tests, test 1 and test 2, and if you click on the green arrow, it will automatically run all tests. If you want to run test 1 at a time, you can go to each test and click on the green run icon. So we'll run test 1 first and the results will be shown in the output. There's one other way to actually see the output window is click on the show test output icon and it will go to the output window. And right now it says that the test 1 is okay. And let's run test 2. Clicking on test 2 run will show the output in the output tab. So that is how you basically run tests using unit test. In case you want to run the test using command line, we also need to add the final block. However, we are not going to be running it in command line, so we'll comment it out. So click on the top right side of how to set up VS Code for Python development. The video will help you set up VS Code for Python development, and I hope you will like it. Now I'll show you how can you utilize the unit test built-in library to test APIs that you have written in Flask. So we will be using the API that we already had written in our previous video, the books API. I have made some changes to the API. I have refactored some code, and I have changed the return code for some of the APIs. You can go to the GitHub repository to check for the latest API code. The GitHub repository is in the description of the video. So I'll compare both APIs to show you what the difference is. So I have changed the body where now instead of book ID, there will be an ID. That's the first change. The second change that I did was instead of getting the table globally, we use a function which gets the table. The creation of the table is little different than how we used to do it earlier. Now we have a primary ID, ID, and that the type of that ID will be an integer. On line number 25 in the previous API, this basically means that there will be an ID, but that ID will be auto incrementing in nature, and that was the whole reason why we were using book underscore ID instead of ID. And you can go back to my previous video to see why we did this change. Then what we did was instead of just using fetch DB method to fetch the DB, now we get each book response, we fetch the DB similar to how we did in our previous API. Here instead of returning the book row, we return the response, the Flask response object. So another thing that we changed was in the db underscore populate, instead of inserting rows, now we do insert underscore ignore, where if the ID is present already, the insert doesn't happen, the insert gets ignored. So this ensures that we don't accidentally populate the DB multiple times. And in the DB populate example, for the DB populate endpoint, instead of using get, we are using post, because it in theory is creating rows in that database. So it should definitely be a post and not a get. And that was my mistake in that video. Some other things that we are doing is we are now returning 201 instead of 200. Again, because it's creation, and it's not returning any rows, it's returning an empty text. So for the endpoint slash API slash books, we haven't changed anything. What we have done is we basically have used the get each book response function here and did code reuse. The majority of changes that we have done is in the slash API slash books slash book ID endpoint, where in the get we have basically reused the get underscore each underscore book underscore response function, and in the put, instead of now returning the book object in the response, we are returning an empty text, and the return code will be 204, which is no content, instead of 200. The other change that we did was in the delete, where now instead of sending back an empty JSON, we are sending empty text. And these are all the changes that I did. So let's go back to API underscore test and create a API test class to test our API. Class API test unit test dot test case. The first test that we will do is for the get request to slash API slash books. So we will be using requests to query the Flask API server, import requests, and we will also add some class variables to API test. So we'll also add some class variables to API test, API underscore URL, and we'll also add another variable, books underscore URL. Before we go any further, we will also run our Flask app. Terminal, Flask API, source bin env bin activate, Python 3 API.py. This will run our Flask server, and once we are done, we'll go back to our API underscore test.py and fetch the request using the URLs that we have added to the API test class. So r is equal to request dot get. We'll get the books from the books URL. First thing, we have to make sure that the status code is 200. And the other thing that we have to make sure is that whatever response we get in our newly created DB, the JSON should have 2 books, because that was what we did in the DB populate. And again, please refer back to my video to see how we did the DB populate. So r.json is a built-in JSON decoder when we are dealing with the JSON data. So in case the JSON decoding fails, r.json will raise an exception. So we have completed our first test in which we will check for the status code of the response as well as the length of the response to see whether we have 2 books in the response field. So go back to the test explorer and we'll just run one task, which will be the test underscore one underscore get underscore all underscore books. So when we run that, the output shows that it ran okay, ran one test okay. So looks like everything worked fine. You can also check the tick icon here. If everything works, it's going to be green. If something went wrong, it will be red. So we don't have to go to the output logs to check what happened, but it's always good to take a look. In the ID, you must have noticed that there's now a run test and a debug test option above each test. If you don't want to go to the test explorer to run each test, you can click on the 2 sections that are now appearing above each test, run test and debug test. Let's write another test which tests the post request to /API/books, which will create a book with a new ID. So you must have noticed I'm adding _1 and _2 here. This is added because what happens in the test runner is the tests are not sequential in the way they are written. They are sequential based on the name of the test. So by adding 1 and 2 in front of the name of the test, what we are trying to do is making sure that these are run in this particular order. So once they are sorted, test underscore 1 will be called first and then test underscore 2. So we'll use requests to post to the books underscore URL, and the JSON object will be, so let's call it API test dot books book underscore object, and we will add this as a class variable. Okay, so in the books underscore object, the ID will be 3, the name is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and the author is J.K. Rowling. So once we fetch the response, we just have to make sure that the response is 201. And this concludes the test for our add new books. And before running this test, what we will do is we'll create another test which actually fetches this new book, and we'll see whether the output of that request matches the book object. So def test underscore 3 underscore get new underscore book, r is equal to request. Again, we are going to use request to get that, and instead of using now the API test.books underscore URL, we'll use the /API/book/id to fetch the new book. We'll use format API test.books URL comma id, where id is equal to 3. because our books object has id is equal to 3. Self dot assert equal. We'll check if the status code is 200, and we'll also check whether the JSON that we received in the request is equal to the book object. So here we'll use another assert method called assert dict equal. Self dot assert dict equal. There are methods for checking list, checking set, or you can also check whether a dictionary contains a subset. So these methods are part of the unit test class. So r.json comma API test dot books underscore object. So now let's run test2 individually and see if it passes. The run test passed successfully. So now we'll fetch the book with id is equal to 3. Run test. And it passes. If we change the id is equal to 4, this will fail because we haven't added a new book which has an id of 4. The test failed because it was not able to fetch that book. So instead of 200, we got a 404. And you can see in the test explorer also there's a red cross here, which shows that it's failed. So we'll change id to 3 again. So the next test we will write will be to test the put. id equals to 3. New book object will copy the book object, and instead of Harry Potter and Philosopher's Stone, let's change the name to The Alchemist, and the author will be Paulo Coelho. Do r is equal to request dot put, and the put will look very similar to post, where we'll be using the URL that we used in test 3, and JSON will be equal to new underscore book underscore object, and we'll verify whether the status code is 204, and we'll fetch that book again to verify if everything works fine. So there will be another additional test that we'll do, test 5, get new book after update. Let's run test 3. Everything works fine. Let's run test 4, which will be the update existing book. So the update existing book worked fine, and the status code that was returned was 204. Now let's verify if the content is same. So we had blindly copied the self.assert dict equal here, but instead of API test.book object, the JSON will look like the new book object. So let's make the new book object as a class variable so that we don't duplicate variables and cause confusion. Let's run the test 5th. So test 5th also passed. So the next request that we have to test is delete. So we'll be using requests.delete, and again we'll be using the same URL. So now again, right, we are copy pasting URLs in test 3, test 4 and test 5. We should be reusing our code. I'll show you how to add class methods here, and we'll return a URL where will we find this formats expression. We will change it to get underscore each underscore book underscore URL. We'll search for this and we'll replace it with self dot get underscore each underscore book underscore URL with ID, and let's find the occurrences. Second occurrence. So we'll run delete on each book URL, and we'll check whether the status code is 204. And let's run the test. The test 6 also succeeded. Now we'll check whether that particular book is present anymore or not. So instead of checking for 200, like we did in test 5, we'll check for 404. So we'll copy this code, line number 60 to 63, and create a new test, test 7, which will get the new book after delete. And let's keep 200 for now and see if and it will fail. And then we'll move it to 400. And now let's change it to 404 and run the test. So it passed, everything was okay. So this basically shows you how to do API testing. The unit test also supports skipping individual test methods or even whole classes of tests. Skipping a test is simply a matter of using skip decorator. So I'll show you how to do it. So we will skip the test underscore one underscore get underscore books. It's a mouthful. So we'll just call them test 1, test 2, test 3. So we'll skip test 1 by using the decorator skip. We can add a custom message here. And now when we'll run the entire suite, the test 1 will be skipped. So it now has a question mark instead of a tick or a cross. And if we look at the output, clear it off. It shows that OK and skipped is equal to 1. And the message is printed in the output, skip this. So there might be scenarios where you are testing something and due to testing one scenario, the other scenario is expected to fail. So in those particular cases, you can use another decorator called expected failure, which will basically mention that yes, this will definitely fail no matter what. So we can use that in our test 7 example. We'll just change the status code to 200, and because the book has already been deleted in test underscore 6, this will definitely fail no matter what. So we'll use the decorator expected failure here. And let's run 6 and 7 in sync, or let's run the entire test suite. So this will fail, but because we have mentioned expected failure, the end result will be an OK, and it will say skipped is equal to 1, expected failures is equal to 1. And this is alright from our testing point of view. So that's it for this video. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you have comment about anything, just leave a comment down below and I will reply to it at the earliest. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section, and thank you for watching.